Good morning and welcome to this Financial Mail Redzone discussion. This morning, live, we're taking your questions in the live chat and asking the big question. As the world's largest generation, has decision-making yet shifted to millennial marketers? We know that there are now more than 11 million millennial global decision makers, and that's on LinkedIn alone. And 73% of millennials in the workforce are now involved in either influencing or making buying decisions for their companies. So naturally, millennial marketers are best suited to speak to millennial consumers. But when it comes to millennial marketers and their revolutionization of the market, are they being given a seat at the table? This morning, we're exploring the role that millennial marketers play in the current marketing landscape and what this means for leading brands and their future strategies. Joining us, the birthday girl herself, founder of Duma Collective, Sibu Mabena, Chief Strategy Officer, TBWA South Africa, and MD of Yellowwood, Refilwe Maluleke, Jay Badza, Head Honcho at Orchard on 25, and Account Director at Tilt Bongani Mahlangu. Sibu, firstly, happy birthday. I'm very glad you made time for us on your birthday.
Thank you so much. I'm just glad to still be considered a millennial. Hi.
We've defined it for the sake of everyone watching as 25 to 40, and you can debate that in the live chat, but that's what we've defined it as for the sake of this conversation. And Sibu, I'm going to come to you first, because I mean, when I think of kind of millennials in marketing in South Africa sort of really crushing it, everyone on this call comes to mind. But I do wonder if you yourself see yourself as a game changer, and if so, what does that mean to be a millennial game changer in marketing? What does that term actually mean?
Geez, how do you answer this without sounding like you've lost all sense of humility and, all the things that we're supposed to be as young people who are seen and not heard? I do consider myself a game changer. I think what we have managed to do at Duma Collective is kind of take things that we think are cool and find ways to convince older people to spend money on the things that we think are cool, because we do believe we are better suited to speak to this audience that is considered the youth, and to a certain extent to people older than us as well, because we do have a reference point of our older siblings, our parents, our grandparents, and we kind of understand the landscape in that we sit in the middle as young people. We've got younger people below us who are the kids, our the primary school, high school people, and then we have our parents who sit above us. So as this sweet spot in the middle, we're able to kind of reference both of these generations and say, how would we sell things to them? And I think we're doing a great job at it, because if you look at what marketing has transformed into, it's kind of fair play for everybody now. The tables are bigger, and a lot of people are not just getting a seat at the table. Some are creating their own and bringing other people along for the journey. So yes, are we game changing? Because when we do get a seat at the table, we're definitely bringing younger people and other people with us. Yeah.
Jay, talk to me for a second about making that switch to kind of, we're conditioned as young people to respect our elders, not to sort of interject when people are speaking. But you are going to find yourself in a meeting where someone who is in their 50s is talking about collecting with young people who are in their 16s. And so when it comes to kind of expressing yourself and having your voice heard and then getting the buy-in, what are some of the challenges that you encounter? I mean, Sibu's painted a really strong picture around the fact that it is happening and that narrative is changing in a South African context. But talk to me for a second about the challenges that come with being the youngest person at that table when you do take that seat there.
Sorry, was that a question for me? I'm just checking.
I'm gonna give it to Jay. Jay?
Oh, sure.
Thank you, Ari. I think, what I really love about what Sibu has just said is our lived experience as young marketing professionals. We have intersected with, people who were possibly, right there when things like the VHS machines were being created, the tape recorders and all of that stuff. And we've now moved into this new world of, the digital space, which everyone is going into. So nothing really shocks us, right? And what I really love about being a fairly young person, with access to some incredible boardrooms, is the fact that I've got my lived experience to be able to back me up. And oftentimes I do find that, it's quite hard to convince people who have never really, walked in your shoes to understand things the way that you do, or to see the shift from a consumer, psyche perspective as much as you do, because they haven't really gone through, those life stages. And as a result, all they are working off is, information that is being shared to them by other people, which is sometimes not credible, or sometimes, is very limited. I do like to, take my far much older colleagues into the streets with me, and just really show them how people live and experience brands in the real world. Because sometimes we can be so cocooned in our boardrooms with our fancy jargons and our amazing presentations, but we actually do forget that, especially in South Africa, we are a brick and mortar country. We've got people who are in the streets, who are driving the culture, and who are just really helping, paint, where the new direction of marketing is going to be going. So if we are deaf, to their experiences, we are not really doing much to aid our brands. So as a result, it's always really is about often challenging them, and also just taking them out of their comfort zone in order for them to be able to just, engage with the world that they might not be able to on the day-to-day basis.
Phil, let me come to you, and specifically tapping into your insight as the Chief Strategy Officer at TBWA and MD of Yellowwood, because you live, eat, sleep, and breathe insights and research and quantifiable information all the time. But talk to me for a second around the power of just being the target audience of the target audience that you're trying to communicate with. And if you feel sometimes that's lost in our essay context, there's definitely academics, and we've all sat through our marketing 2A lectures, and we know the 6 Ps and the 5 Qs, and we can all definitely apply that regardless of what age we are. But when it comes to just being the target audience of the target audience that you're trying to connect with, what are some of the pros that come with that, and does that happen often enough in our context?
Thank you, Ari. I mean, I think that is a very good question. I think it's the reality of when you are the target audience that your business or your client is trying to engage with, there is this expectation that you know everything about that target audience, and that you can almost be, I think Tupac used to say it all the time, right? I'm not responsible for every Black man in America, because that was the expectation. And so I think that often happens because you do find yourself sometimes being the only version of that target audience in the room. And I think sometimes the mistake happens that we become overly dependent on that individual to know every single thing about their target audience. But inevitably, we are all framed by or informed by our own experiences, by the things that we know. And so the reality is, I have no idea what the millennial experience is of a colored person in Cape Town. And I have no idea what the lived experience is of a millennial who has grown up in a rural area in the Northwest, because that's just, it's not my lived experience. I can make some informed assumptions, but I don't know. And I think that this expectation and reliance that we place on one individual to know everything, I actually think is kind of dangerous. And we should go and find out. Let's go ask them the question. Let's go really explore that, because I don't feel like I'm equipped to really give meaningful insight on that. And I really think that that's a big part of the problem when we don't have enough diversity, let me put it that way, inside the boardroom, because we do need people who can kind of, challenge some of the assumptions that we make, the things we think we know, because I happen to fall into that particular age group. So I think that's the first thing. And the second thing I would want to highlight is, and apologies to everybody on the panel, but we are not really youth anymore. If we think about it, if millennials are 25 to 40, there's this conception that we are still very much part of the youth. But Gen Z are much bigger component part of the youth. And there are some fundamental differences between millennials and Gen Zs. And so that doesn't always translate just because you know what millennials are interested in and what they want. And yes, we've got an enormous amount of purchasing power. If your client is very much a youth brand, I think you're doing them a disservice by simply feeding them millennial insights and kind of framing them as youth insights. Because I'm sorry, guys, it's just, that's not who you are anymore.
So, Bongani, let me come to you for a second then, because we know that the briefs for every brand wanting to be on TikTok now are coming through thick and fast, and they want to connect with these Gen Z kids. But there are not 16 to 17-year-olds working in agencies that are getting these briefs yet. So even adding that layer of, we've got someone who's 25, 26, 27, even sort of up until the age of 30, working on sort of plans and ideas for a platform like TikTok. It can't be the kids necessarily doing it. It can be a youth advisory, and you can go into schools, you can chat to those young people. But at the end of the day, in an agency context, someone who is a little older than that Gen Z demographic is going to have to put some form of a vert together. So what kind of lens should one walk into that scenario with in terms of putting together something for a younger generation? And what's the honest conversation that you need to have with yourself in creating a solution to a brand wanting to connect with that younger audience?
I think that's a very, very good question, Ari. I think the first stance is back to the point that Refilo was saying, that as much as we are not that much youth, we cannot, as millennials, be almost naive to think that we know it all. And it's all about just putting in the groundwork and doing the legwork and doing the homework in sort of understanding and using almost like your social listening expertise. As much as we are not that much of a youth, as much as the Gen Z, we do spend a lot of time on social media platforms. We do spend a lot of time out in the streets. It's a lot of social listening. I think for me in my career, I've always spent the time to just always listen and just to see what the different perceptions are. But you definitely need numbers to back you up. When you revert and speak to what the TikTokers are doing, you need to have those numbers. Have something that really shows what's working on the platform, so that when you revert back to your client with a decision that they have to make, it's an informed decision. As much as you are the millennial and you are reaching to that target audience, you still definitely need to have something that backs you up, and so that we can all make an informed decision going forward. I think that's the best way, is just do the legwork, be out there, keep your finger on the pulse. The digital space is quite dynamic. It changes every week, and you always need to be online. You always need to know what's happening. And that's the only way you can really make good decisions, is making informed decisions.
Sibu?
And just to add to that, I think the agency landscape, there's a greater opportunity now for things to change and adapt to what's going on in the marketplace. Of course, it is difficult and harder to have inexperienced people in your system and people that you've consistently got to coach and teach and, help learn the ways of working. But our resident Gen Zs, which are our interns, are really, I suppose, the engine of our business at Duma Collective, because without them, we don't have that lived experience. I'm 30 years old now. And as the person who is now the admin lady, because that's what my life has turned into as a business owner, I've gone from being the super creative, the one who knows what's going on. And that was me between 21 and 25. I think now in growing the agency, I've had to take on a different hat and be that of a salary payer, on-time tax, rent, legal, all of those HR things, and allow the young people to do the work and come up with the ideas and give them that space to speak and encourage them to have the confidence to bring their ideas to the table. And I think that's also what we're seeing with the younger agencies that are cropping up, the likes of an Orchard, the likes of a Duma Collective, etc., that in our non-traditional way of being, we are allowing what was previously difficult for younger people to enter into, the space for them to do so now.
Let's unpack the 5 and you objectively take a look at the business, even though you eat, sleep, and breathe it every day. What is it you think that has given rise to you being able to run with that? Because the idea of loading a vendor that didn't have 100 people working at it for a marketing leader 10 years ago was a foreign concept. But now they're more than happy to invite someone who's got 10, 12 people working in an agency to be a part of the ecosystem and to have an equal say with what some of those bigger agencies have. So what would you attribute that success and that opportunity to?
I think that's a very important question and probably one of my most favorite. I think there's a movement and a shift that is happening within our industry. And thanks to, the seat being extended to millennial marketeers who are now decision makers, who are able to take much bolder risks and find somebody who is either leaving an established agency and trying out something on their own, and just giving them, a seat at that table. That never used to happen when I, got into the industry probably about 15 or so years ago. It would be suicidal for a young, especially Black person to even dream of wanting to go and start their own agency because it was so hard. And, it's not that, the generation before us wasn't trying, but it's, I think, there were quite a few shifts that needed to happen in the global landscape to be able to allow us to come to this space. I think social media has been quite instrumental in also helping drive that shift, because now the people who used to be decision makers now have to also market on channels and platforms that they don't even know, that they're not part of, that they don't relate to. And as a result, they're also now starting to really bring in some bold and innovative young people to now come on the journey with them, in order for them to be able to to do great work together. I mean, I'm inspired when I look at brands like Momentum, who've got a chief marketing officer, young Black woman who's in her early 40s, because back in the day, those were jobs that were reserved for 60-year-olds who were just about to retire, So it is always quite exciting, to see that fundamental shift that is happening within our landscape, and the incredible contribution that young agencies like ourselves are also making in this space. As much as yes, we don't have the experience and the legacy, we actually have to work twice as hard in order to be able to prove ourselves. We have to at times, have to argue with people who are so indoctrinated and framed in such a systematic way of thinking that new and exciting things sound vulgarish to them. And also do it, with our hair and our bold colored blazers, and our big personalities, and just not conform to what the usual working place had been traditionally. So there's a lot of quite a pull and push that is happening within this space. But I think that's actually what really makes it quite exciting. And we just need to see a more empowered group of millennial decision makers getting a seat at the table, so that they can also be able to continue extending these few tables that have become available to agencies like Duma, DNA, or ourselves.
Phil, let me come to you to land out that thought.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a really interesting and provocative question that you've raised, Ari, and I really enjoyed Jay's answer to it. And it's made me think of, for big companies, so let's call, financial services or whatever the case may be, who are 100 years old, the biggest legacy challenge that they face is often got to do with their technology, right? They've got these outdated systems, and updating them is going to cost them R1 billion. And so you do have younger players that don't have that burden, right? So players like Capitec, like Time Bank, etc., who can build systems that are relevant for today versus trying to fix systems from the past. And I think in an agency world, that big legacy challenge has got less to do with technology, although that is important, and much more to do with exactly what Jay was talking about, right? That your culture and your beliefs in terms of how we rise up the ladder, and the environment that enables the delivery of great creative, that's the thing you've got to change. And it becomes incredibly hard when the stalwarts of the industry have grown up and thrived in a very different environment. And so I think, one of the things that I know I certainly have, and many of my peers have struggled with, is the kind of unconscious biases that make it really difficult to be heard and to succeed, because people are so entrenched, and I like the word Jay used, indoctrinated, in that, to make great creative, you need somewhat of a bit of a hostile environment, right? And this is not pointing anything at you, Ari, because I don't know if this is how it works with you, but there's a certain kind of behavior that's kind of accepted from a lot of great creatives, right? Like, they're allowed to shout at people, they're allowed to be a little bit rude, a little bit dismissive, because that's just how it's always been. And I think for millennials, that's less the case, right? Like, I don't want to be shouted at work. This is just work. We're not curing cancer, right? Like, can I be heard, and can I be appreciated without having to live in a very difficult culture? And I think that's the thing that's the kind of legacy piece that I think a lot of the big creative agencies struggle with, right? That your culture has to shift quite fundamentally if you want to attract and retain the kind of young talent that can truly move your business forward.
The emergence, I guess, of sort of younger agencies is probably the result of them not being able to attract and hold that talent. Because certainly when you look at kind of some of the big sort of emerging young leaders in terms of their own kind of businesses that they've created, when you start looking at that LinkedIn, you see 2 or 3 years at an agency and then they were over it. So maybe it's not evolving at the rate that it should. I want to speak for a second, though, on the kind of legacy that sort of informs the work, right? So we're living in a day and age where one person on TikTok can create this beautiful piece of content without 7 art directors, a location shoot, a separate production agency, 16 different creatives working on the treatment. And I would imagine that for kind of massive agencies, that's a little intimidating when one person can go and create something that is of TVC quality and that resonates with audiences and put it onto their TikTok platform, and they can sit for weeks to be able to craft that. But obviously, it's about a balance of all of that. It's about a TVC, but it's about the TikTok as well. So, Bongani, when it comes to brands building what their communications look like, I don't think we're at a point yet where a brand can say we only advertise on TikTok and we only work with TikTok creators. A brand is always going to have to create some form of monologue. They're going to have to create some form of piece that they create that's owned by them, and then allow other people to create content around the brand. But where do you see that going in terms of brands speaking about themselves and people speaking about brands, i.e. the influencer space, and what that mix is possibly starting to look like and how it's evolving?
Yeah, I think, I love this conversation, because this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. Is we all know that it's a lot more powerful when people speak about a brand versus when a brand speaks about themselves, right? So I think there has to be a balance in understanding that when a brand wants to almost leverage user-generated content. For example, I'll give you an example with BMW. They see that Nut Music, as a musician, loves BMW. He's always talking about it. He's fighting with other, not fighting, but like having a conversation with other influencers online who speak about a rival brand like Mercedes-Benz. And you see that conversation coming in, and you see he's becoming a sort of ambassador by himself. And then you approach him and you start working with him and creating content with him. It always has to be balanced in that the influencer is a brand as well, and you as a brand, when you want to collaborate with them, you must understand that you shouldn't push your brand narrative only, but also understand that you need to accommodate the influencer's brand narrative as well, because they understand their own audience. So it's always about collaboration. I always tell my clients when we're working with influencers that we need to have them on board. We need to speak to them and run through the campaign ideas, run through the objectives, let them understand what we are trying to achieve, because it's a collaborative effort and we all have the same goal in mind. So the balance for me would always be the digital space is ever growing, and the brand needs to evolve in that digital space along with the ambassadors, be it the influencers, be it the nano influencers, the micro influencers, those people who speak for your brand without you even paying them. You need to collaborate with those as well. You need to collaborate with those who really believe in the brand. And also bear in mind that for me, the above the line, your TV ads, your radio ads, they're still relevant because there's such a huge market in South Africa of people who don't have access to the internet. And we always think Twitter, for example, speaks for the whole country. It actually doesn't. There are so many people who don't have access to what's happening on the internet, and they rely on your billboards, your TV ads, your radio ads. And it's a huge market in South Africa that rely on that. So you have to keep that balance between the two. The digital focus will always be for the future, but as it stands right now, if you look at the mass market, we are still talking traditional. We are still talking to the people that don't have access to internet. So you almost have to think digital future and mass market current. And that's the best way, I think, that's the direction I see it going.
Well, let me come to you. I'm curious if you're going to fight for the TVC or not, but we'll find out in a second.
I'm definitely a champion for a mix of traditional and new age mediums, because to Mongane's point, not everybody is on Twitter. And sometimes we see these brands under fire on Twitter, but it's not affecting their numbers. People are still going to Nando's to buy a quarter chicken, okay? So just because things are blowing up on Twitter or burning on Twitter, it really isn't a reflection of the entire population of South Africa. But what I actually wanted to touch on was, I think what we do need to work harder on as younger marketers is educating the older decision makers, and even some of the younger decision makers on the process of marketing. I think what we are finding is that a lot of people don't really have an appreciation of how long it takes to do things, or what the meaning of collaboration is, or the fact that a TikTok that could have taken someone 30 seconds to make, when it is adjusted for brand communication purpose, should take a week or 2 weeks or even 5. And what we find is that people just think things can happen like that because, come on, you guys are young, you can make things, just put it together, man. And it's like, no, because it's newer, it doesn't mean that there's less of a creative process going into it, that we need time for reverts, and the fact that the client may not understand what we're trying to do the first time around. So we do actually have to apply a little bit more time. So there's this contention, I think, between new age way of doing things, but custodians of brands who have an older and traditional way of doing things. So yeah.
Jay, I'm going to come to you in a second, but it does bring to mind something that Kinsani Nobanda from Nedbank said to us a couple of days ago on our previous webcast, that brands are an iceberg, and what we see is the tip and we see the final piece, but actually what's below that is extensive amounts of work. That's all the decks, deck draft 1, the whip 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and what we see is kind of the tip. But Jay, talk to me for a second around this influencer piece and this traditional piece, and all of them kind of playing at the playground happily together.
I love actually how you phrased your question right at the end, because I think there's a seat at the table for everyone. One of the major challenges that we do face in our industry is that everybody thinks that, when a younger, more modern, more youthful agency is invited to the table, they're there to eliminate the big, top 5 agencies. But I can tell you that some of our best work have been due to collaborations with other big agencies. I mean, we've been working with, Joe Public on the Castle Milk Stout brand for the last 5 years. And every year, our campaigns go and, do a clean sweep at the lorries. But those ideas, originate from somewhere. They they come from, big creative agency with the resource to go into research and insights, all of that stuff. But then when they need those ideas to come to life, they come to people like us, because we are very much in tune with, with the consumer. We know what the consumer is saying. We know how to evoke emotion out of the consumer. We know how to put branded content out there in a way that doesn't make it look like it's branded content. So the collaboration of the two together is actually what really makes it more powerful. And I think what we need to be able to push, more marketing departments to try and do is to, don't think that it's an either or. You need both the experience and all of that stuff that does come with the traditional agency, but also you need the agility and the connectedness to the consumer that comes with agencies like ours, because at the end of the day, the brand is the one that is winning, and brands who are playing within that space are doing incredible work. I mean, I can even shout out to some of the work that Sibu has been doing on DSTV. That is work that would never have happened if a young agency like hers was working within that environment. So just, bring us, invite us to the table, see what we can be able to contribute, and you'll be amazed at how we can be able to collaborate rather than fight, because there is definitely, space for all of us to coexist, to mentor each other as well, which is absolutely important, because sometimes I think, the older guys just think, okay, cool, I've given you a seat at the table, goodbye. But young agencies also need people to hold their hands, to mentor them, to coach them, because we haven't been doing this for 20, 25 years. And then you learn that you actually don't lose business because of work. Sometimes you lose it because of relationships, but you haven't been spending enough time cultivating those relationships because you've been focusing on the work. So if you're a leader who's sitting at the table, how can you also be able to carry other young people on the journey with you and ensure that you're holding their hand along the way and not just briefing and critiquing work? Just show a little bit more empathy and leadership, so that, the skills are being passed from one generation to the other.
And some of us have only been alive for as long as these people have been working. There's also our entire existence can be matched to the existence of agencies, that are the ones that we're supposed to be working with and we are hoping to work with. And to Jay's point, we're really not there to take away any cheese from anyone's table. We would like to work with people in order for this market to grow, because at the end of the day, we're marketing and communications degrees had fewer people. You're seeing more and more young people choose to go into this stream of work because it now looks like the doors have been opened. You can be young, Black, creative, and have a job that will buy you a house like Jay Badzas, okay? Because that is what we're seeing happen. But more than that, I really would appeal to marketers and people who are in positions of power to consider the marketing mix, not just from a tools of marketing perspective, but from agency partners, to say it is easier to go with one big lead creative agency that can kind of come through with a full suite of services. But what if you were to challenge yourself and kind of bring in the smaller players and force the bigger guys to work with the smaller guys? And there are lots of brands who are trying to do that now, but what is blocking the brand custodians is procurement processes that say, no, our policy is ABC, except policy can be changed. Policy is created. It is not something that is forced on people. And if there is a will, there is a way. So it's not just an appeal to younger marketers or the older marketers, but also just the suits in the background, the people we don't know as the people who are having fun and getting paid to do cool shit. We really need the procurement teams to come on board and also champion the change, and not just to Black agencies, not to white agencies, but to younger people who want to play and have great ideas to offer, and great work to bring to the table.
Rafil, will round us out on the big business question. The procurement people never even meet the agencies, and now they're gonna change their policies, which I think is a fantastic thing. But getting that shift and that integration, typically the vendor pros, you never meet that person, you never see that person, they never chat to you, they just make a decision, and that's structural stuff that has to kind of change, right? But Rafil, will round us out on this big business question.
Sure. So, Ari, the reason I put up my hand is actually because there was something really fascinating in this conversation that you've been having with Sibu and Jay. And I think Sibu mentioned that there's almost like a responsibility to educate marketers, right? To educate millennial marketers, whether you're client side or agency side. And for me, that's something fundamentally important, because when I think about the most successful marketers in the country, you mentioned Kensani Nobanda, who actually just won the Marketer of the Year at the Luries, big clients. It's because they can do that. They can know that it is important that people open more net bank accounts. Like, that's actually what we're trying to do here. And I think that's, if there's one thing I could actually appeal on both sides of the fence, right? We as young marketers, if we want to prove that we not only deserve the seat at the table, but that we can actually add an enormous amount of value by being there. You've got to learn to do that, speak the language of business, understand what's important to people, and frame the things that you are doing in a way that shows them that you care about what matters to them, and that your work is going to help them achieve those objectives. And not just that you'll be the coolest brand at the Gen Next Awards, but actually that you will also help them grow their business. So I just thought that was a really interesting point that Sibu alluded to, and I think millennial marketers, that's one of the things we've got to get right.
Well, we are talking millennial marketers live this morning on the Financial Mail Redzone. We're hanging out with Sibu Mabena, Refiwe Maluleke, Jade Badza, and Bongani Mahlangu. We've got some audience questions that I'm going to get to in a second, but just to kind of round out Refiwe and Sibu and Jay's conversation around the caliber of the marketer. The flip side of them, of course, understanding the business within which they operate, is understanding how communications have evolved, and how to create successful communications that sometimes can even perform without paid media, which to many marketers has become a foreign concept even, but stuff can do well if it's just posted. It just has to be the right stuff. So Bongani, talk to me for a second around that journey that you have to take with a client who maybe is in a different age demographic, in a different life stage, but is trying to connect with a specific audience, and educating that client around, a TikTok actually can't look like that because no one's really gonna care. Or an Instagram post, we can't put, your logo. The influencer can't just post your TV ad. It's not going to get the views that they get when they do a beauty vlog, because a lot of these conversations are still happening, and we see it all the time where they cotton onto the idea of something, but then when it comes to actually allowing the agency or the influencer or whoever's sort of creating that content to execute it, it lands up feeling quite forced and quite staged. So how do you start to educate the client without being condescending and saying, I'm young, you're old, I know, you don't? Because that conversation is never going to get anywhere.
Yes, I think the first thing is, when we speak to the decision makers who are older than us and may not understand the platforms as much as we do, is the best way is always to show them what works. It's not to say, listen, you don't know what's happening, but show them this is what's happening. This is the great type of content that works. This is the type of content that really speaks well with this type of audience. And I think for me, I love using references when I speak to my clients and trying to show them what's the best type of work is. I use references that have the engagement numbers there, the reach numbers there. And, when you start showing them a number of different types of content on different types of platforms, then you start seeing a pattern, you start seeing a common thread, and then that's the common thread that you run through them, and you're like, this is how it works. This for TikTok, this is the shorter type of content that really does well. For Instagram, it's always going to be content about aesthetics. It's not going to be about copy-heavy stuff and trying to sell your product or oversell your product. And at the same time, being that person that advises your clients to sort of be able to open up to how the different platforms work, you also have to understand sometimes our clients have their hands tied in that they have policies. They work for a global company that's been around for 175 years, and this is how the policy is, and this is how our content needs to look. We must have our logo here. The influencer must wear a top with the logo. The copy must have the caption, tag us with the hashtag. We are almost saying too much in one sort of person. We always try to fight that, but we do sometimes lose that battle. But essentially for me, I really feel it's just about educating and showing what works. And I think the more you do that, the more they start to see that, essentially it actually works better if we don't have to have our logo in that image. We don't have to, and say it in the caption as well, and say paid partnership with this brand. We know this is this brand, but it's just referencing and educating. And what I appreciate about that is, as much as I'm a young millennial right now, at some points there will be Gen Zs trying to teach me something, and they are also decision makers. So as much as we are the young people now, it's not going to be that case forever. And once the younger generation comes up and wants to almost help us to change the way we are thinking, we would also want to be educated and see what works and seeing the references. So for me, it's definitely just show your clients what works and let that be the thing that speaks for you.
I feel we would argue that we're already old, Bonds. She's pinned us as past our sell-by date. But luckily we still, there's no 17-year-olds in the agencies yet. Maybe if they move matric age earlier, there could be a problem. But just quickly to spend the last few minutes on some audience questions, some specific stuff around content. This is from Angela. Angela says, are brands taking advantage enough of the power of video content? I'm going to point this in strategy's direction. Refill video content, are brands doing enough of it? And also, are brands geared to do a lot of it? Because brands are intimidated by making 30 seconds. Now you're asking them to make 30 seconds every few days. And that's a lot if you're dealing with brands that love a treatment and love a 6-month process for a TV ad.
I love that you're asking a content question to a strategist.